Everybody in the UK crime book land. I'm here with Simon Mason to talk about his debut crime novel. If you could give us a quick introduction about the plot, please, Simon.
Yes, well, thank you, Alex. So it's not my first crime novel, actually, although it's my first crime novel for adults. So I'd written 3 crime novels for what we in the publishing world call young adults. I've never met a young adult who describes themselves as a young adult, but it was a series of books with a protagonist who was 16, and a publisher got in touch with me and asked if I'd be interested in writing a crime book for an adult audience, and so I fancied having a go, and that's how the idea came to me. The particular idea for this story was, or part of it anyway, was handed to me by a friend who worked as a handyman for one of the Oxford colleges, and what he told me sort of caught my attention. I thought maybe I could adapt it and develop it into a longer story.
I noticed that you did the young adult in 2019. What would you say the differences between a young adult novel and a full adult crime novel are?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, in a way, I want to say not very much at all. I mean, I think these differences can be exaggerated. I've written books for younger children as well, and in my experience, children are not less smart than adults. I mean, quite the reverse, really. You know, they are sharp. Their brains are fresher. They see things and they understand things very quickly. But what they don't have is so much knowledge of the world, just simply because they've been on the planet for less time. And so you do have to sometimes explain things more to a younger audience. With the YA books, I mean, the people reading them are sort of teenagers or maybe in their 20s. They know enough about the world. And there wasn't much difference at all. But there is then the issue of, you know, what are you allowed, as it were, to put into a book for a younger reader? And the publisher would have a say about that. And I'm talking about obvious things like sex or violence, those sorts of things. I mean, my feeling is that any writer will draw the line in the sand where they particularly feel it should be drawn. I would try and listen to the story. I don't want to traumatize a younger readership with too much of anything. So, for instance, sex or violence, but I want to allow the story freedom to go where it wants. So I would try to be as frank as possible to a young adult audience. And in the end, you know, you make these sorts of compromises and try to let the story go where it wants as much as possible.
Would you say that it's helpful to have personal experience of the Oxford life with your book?
It is for me, I think, yes. I've always been the sort of writer that wants to write about what's going on around me, which is why I started writing books for younger readers, because my wife and I had children, and they were suddenly sort of in my face and everywhere, it seemed. And so when it comes to a setting, I like to know the place. I mean, we were talking earlier, Alex, about setting a crime novel in Oxford. It's not exactly the most original move. And, I could have been daunted by that, but I live here. It's handy. I feel I know it fairly well. And so, yeah, it was important to me to write about what I know.
It's the two characters for me, with both the same surname, was quite a nice little start.
Good. Well, I'm glad you thought it was a nice little start. Yeah. So with the idea of the characters, that, I mean, I think sometimes for a writer, although I can only speak for myself, but sometimes for a writer, they just sort of float into the unconscious, a bit like daydreaming. And Ryan Wilkins was the guy who floated into my imagination first. He's the one who's well, to look at him, he's like a chav, really. I suppose you might think he was a member of the criminal classes. He grew up in a very deprived sort of way. He's got, no manners whatsoever. And I was attracted by the idea of him. And then from that came the idea of another, well, a partner for him, another detective who might be very different, who might be very suave and sophisticated and very well educated. And then there was an incident where Ryan, the chav, would be sent to handle a case where Ray, the very sophisticated guy, would have gone ordinarily. So I gave them the same surname, so there'd be sort of a reason for confusion. The wrong Wilkins, Ryan, not Ray, gets sent out to Barnabas Hall.
Quite a complicated first day, and with the background of another awkward set of crimes. It's there's a lot of things going on in your book. How did you balance that problem?
I think for me, what I'm most concerned about with the crime writing I've done are three things. One is, and I think most importantly, the story and plotting out the story. And the second thing is trying to create the characters that might engage with readers. And then the third thing is evoking a particular sort of setting. And so I focused on those three things, really. And in terms of the story, it was very much just being preoccupied with what would be most exciting, what would draw the reader in, what would make the reader want to keep reading. And only after I was sort of working on that a lot did I start to see maybe there were some other themes emerging that might be quite interesting, but they weren't my motivation. So, the themes of, I don't know, the inequality in Oxford, which is very obvious and which comes into the novel, that wasn't my starting point at all. That just sort of emerged out of the as it were, the crime plot.
Yeah. In my review, I titled it the opposite sides of the same coin. I mean, the two characters and also the superintendent. When deciding how far to go with other characters, how important do you think a good team is when writing a book like that?
A good police detective team.
Yeah.
I didn't begin by thinking too much about that. I was preoccupied with the two characters I had, Ryan and Ray. But they are a team, of course, and I did immediately feel that Ryan needed a foil, and that's very traditional, isn't it? It's Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson and so many other examples, and I wanted them to be very different. And it felt to me that the difference between the two individuals were also, that relationship was also sort of representative of the well, you say two sides of a coin, the two sides of Oxford, which is on the one hand very privileged and very elite, and on the other hand, although maybe people don't know about it so much, it's got a lot of areas of deprivation in Oxford. Blackbird Leys and Rose Hill and Barton are among areas that are in the country's highest areas of deprivation. So the team, the police detective team, also I felt stood in for this sort of tension in the city between the very wealthy and the very poor. That's putting it in a very crude way. Another way of putting it would be between areas of the city like the university that are privileged to the extent that they have a lot of influence, a lot of deep and strong connections with the media, with big business, with governments around the world, and then people like Ryan who basically come from nowhere and don't have that ready-made network of influential people. So the police team functioned in a way to represent that wider sort of tension.
Yeah. What is Town and Gown really like as a teacher now?
Well, I think it does still exist. For in the way that I've just said, the university is sort of, it's not like in Cambridge where it's much smaller. It's mainly university. In Oxford, there is a lot of town as well as the gown, but the gown is just like incredibly important, you know. And
Yeah.
the university colleges own so much land. They, as I say, have these deep, strong connections with government level and with media and so on. And it's not that the town is all poor. That's not it, because there are elements of the town that are also very, very wealthy. But there is still this division, I think, maybe less between town and gown and more between the privilege and the non-privilege that goes on.
When reading and preparing, what do you read as part of your downtime?
Oh, that's a nice question. Well, I do read a lot for pleasure, and I just follow my nose really. So it could be anything. 20th century classics I read more than anything else, I suppose. I keep a book. I keep a record of what I like to read. So I'm just looking through what I read this last year. I read a lot of Simenon, the Maigret novels. I'm working my way through them. I think they're fantastic and so unthriller-like in their sort of thrillerness. What else did I read? Peter Temple was I don't know if you know, he's a South Africa, right? Okay, so Australian, writes about Australian. He's a wonderful crime writer, and I just love reading his prose apart from anything else. I read, let's see, Maddox Ford. I read his tetralogy about the First World War, Parade's End. That was great. I really liked that. I discovered a writer called Rachel Cusk. I'm sure lots of people know her already. I didn't, but the Outline trilogy. She's a very, I suppose you'd say, a very literary writer, but I found her books incredibly Moorish. I just wanted to turn the pages and find out more about the characters that she was describing. Yeah, so they were some of the. V.S. Pritchett, do you know him?
No, not heard of him. No.
Okay, V.S. Pritchett. He's in a way he's my favourite author of all time. I think he's a very sort of bufferish English 20th century guy. Born 1900, died in the 1990s. Short stories, really, and I think they last less well than novels, just simply because publishers aren't so committed to them. But he's a wonderful writer. When I was working for OUP, I was very briefly an editor on a reprint series called 20th Century Classics, and we republished two of his novels. Yeah. And I did something wrong. I can't remember what it was, but he rang me up. So my great hero, age 90 odd, and he just shouted at me. He just shouted and shouted and shouted. And I got quite anxious because he was really old. He was starting to pant because he was shouting so much. And in the end, he couldn't go on. And he said, I can't shout at you anymore because I'm too old, but I'm going to get my wife to come and shout at you now. And she's younger than I am. And she did. She came along and she had another go at me. It went on for about half an hour. It was extraordinary. Anyway, that's my only connection with V.S. Pritchett, but he's one of my great heroes.
What would you say was the hardest thing about writing about classics? Because it must be a very different thing about writing about other people's work. I know I do that with reviews, a whole book on the subject.
Yeah, so I wrote this book for Rough Guides, the Rough Guide to Classic Novels, and I was saying to Alex earlier, my job was to pick 200 classic novels from all world languages and then write a very short piece about them. And they weren't just my own favourites. I had criteria by which I had to choose them. But the pieces were very short. They were like 300 words. And the purpose was not to recount the plot. or place them in literary history or anything like that. It was purely about why I thought these books might give a reader pleasure. And that was really quite challenging, but it was exactly the sort of thing that I like to think about. Not is this book an important book, but is this book a pleasure-giving book? And so it was all about, it might be funny, it might be interesting, the setting might be great, it might be full of philosophical notion, it might be action-packed, And so I focused on what I thought were the pleasure-giving points of books. And I like doing it so much that I still do that with the books I read now. So I've got about 1,000 of these pieces, very short pieces written, and they're really all about me. What I think gave me pleasure about them.
Yeah, that reminds me of what I probably do with my blog, because I do about four or five paragraphs on it. So yeah, I can imagine what that's kind of like.
And not too much. I think that was important for me as a writing exercise. It was great to try and say something about, I don't know, Proust in Search of Lost Time, right? It's 3,000 pages, but I had to say something about it in 300 words. It was sort of almost funny. What can you say? But that was the challenge. And saying something short, I think is really good. So I like blogs. I think they're short communications that say a lot in a short space.
Saying things short, did that kind of help with writing for children? Or was that kind of a habit you got into?
I've always liked writing short, but yeah, I think writing for children, you're right. I started writing for children because we had children, and I was thinking about children. I was watching children. I was writing down in my journal the sort of stuff that they were doing, but also I was reading books to them, and I started writing and then reading that to them. And they don't want to waste any time at all. They want to get into the story, right? And so if my stories were a bit slow, they would really let me know. They would sort of shout out, "Boring, more jokes, what's going on?" And so I think being quick is a lovely thing to do, and it's true, particularly with children. And then once you get a child who's interested, who's reading or listening to a story, and if you get their interest, then they're hooked. Yeah. That's one of the beauties about children. They're not distracted like adults sometimes are. They're just completely in that moment.
Because I noticed the relationship between Ryan and his little boy was a key element for me, because that was just such a nice way to break up what could probably been a very stressful. Did you find that yourself, or?
Well, I'm really glad that you like the little boy, who's also called Ryan. So Ryan has a son who's about 2.5, Ryan Jr. And with all my books, there's nearly always a character who basically gate crashes the story. So I might have a small role for this character, but that's meant to be it, and they're meant to stay in the background. But they won't stay in the background. They just blunder to the front of the stage or force their way to the front of the stage, and they won't shut up. And little Ryan was like that. He appeared, and then I found myself really liking that relationship between him and his father. And one of the things about that is, you would expect, I think, in a sort of prejudicial way to someone like Ryan to be a rather bad father, but he might be forgetful and he's got no manners, as I said, but actually he's a really good father. And so those moments with his little boy, I were important to my conception of Ryan. But then, as I say, little Ryan he wouldn't go away, basically. So I kept him in a lot of scenes that he wasn't intended to be in. And yeah, I did really enjoy writing about him.
Did your own children kind of influence that kind of relationship? Or I know that they're probably older now, but yeah.
They're much older. They're sort of somehow older than I am. I don't understand that, but they know more about the world than I ever did. Yeah, they're enormous. One's 30 and one's 27. Yeah, I think they did, because as I was saying, I like to write about what's around me. And so when we had children, only two, but seemed like a lot more somehow in the house. And they were doing such extraordinary things. I mean, bizarre things sometimes, that I was writing about them and writing down what they were saying and what they were doing, and that was part of my relationship with them. It was like, a bit of what was a very deep sort of thing, and I think, yeah, they then influenced everything I wrote about children, entirely. It comes from that relationship I have with them.
I always find that dialogue is the hardest thing for me to write, but I noticed how different the two characters were, and how different their dialogue frame was. When did you get that? When did you get be so comfortable with two different kinds of character? I think.
Well, I'm really glad you noticed the difference in dialogue, and it's very kind of you to say that. I like dialogue, and I think, if I had to pick something I thought I did better than other things, I would say, or more easily, I do dialogue more easily than other things. I thought this was a great gift, and then I talked to Philip Pullman, who obviously a wonderful writer, and he said, yeah, but dialogue's easy, Simon. That's the easiest thing. It's low grade writers who can do dialogue. The hard thing is description, which, yeah, I do find harder. I think when I'm thinking about character, the way they speak is a really important characteristic, and so I'm trying to capture a certain way of talking, which might then give the reader a flavour of the sort of character they are. And when I'm writing dialogue, then I'll read it out loud.
Yeah.
It's sometimes in funny accents. I mean, the guy who works next door to me in the house, he must think I'm a total nutter, because I'm sure he can hear me shouting to myself in my room. But yeah, the noise, the way people express themselves, what they don't say, as well as what they are saying, all those things I think of as really important to the conception of character.
Yeah. Have you heard the audiobook? Because that's why I find dialogue so important, because I'm hearing the voices.
Yeah, no, I haven't heard. So is that how you read it, Alex?
Yeah, through audio. Yeah.
Okay, so what was your impression of it?
I just thought it was really good from the narrator. I just wish sometimes they always did more than one. I like it when there's more than one narrator, but in this case it worked.
Right. Okay, good. I'm glad. I must listen to it then. I haven't done.
Yeah. I mean, the book's only been out like 4 days. What's it felt like to have it only been out so long?
Yeah, it's I think with author, well, I find, I go through various stages. It's funny business in a way, because I finished this book 18 months ago, and then you enter this sort of long pre-publication period. You get a lot of my publishers are wonderful. You get a lot of affirmation from the publisher. They take on the book. They say, "Oh, we love it. We're going to publish it. It'd be fantastic." And then things die down. And anyway, I get sort of a bit glum. And then as publication time draws nearer, I get pretty scared, actually. And I hope that no one's going to notice it, because, it's probably just not as good as I thought, not as good as my publishers thought. It's going to flop. I get pretty convinced about that. So I was feeling trepidatious, and but then it's had some nice reviews, which is I don't know how important they are, but it's nice. It's nice for my ego. And I know it's reprinted already, so that's really that's a good sign. I haven't actually had copies of the book yet, but I have seen it in bookshops. So it's but again, it's funny. I mean, these things are momentary. This moment now of being published, it's copies in the shops, reviews appearing. It's all very exciting, but you mustn't get used to it, because in a month's time, there's just loads of other new books in the shop and loads of other books being reviewed and stuff. So
yeah, because you've been doing it quite a long time, haven't you? Since
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, no, that's right. So I'm familiar now with this sort of rhythm that an author goes through, and so I wouldn't get I wouldn't get carried away. I'm not getting carried away.
what now that you've finished the first adult novel, what has it been like talking over it with your students? Because you were saying something to me about that earlier on before we started.
Yes, so I do a bit of teaching, but I don't teach writing actually. So no, that's wrong. I do teach writing, but not my own stuff, not creative writing.
Yeah.
So the teaching I'm doing at the moment is as a Royal Literary Fund fellow in Exeter College, and I am the writing tutor. So I help students with writing their essays. So I haven't been talking to anyone about this. Well, you're the first person I've talked to about this book.
Yeah. That's lovely to know that. I'm just curious because you said that you were worried about whether your students will say, is it based on here?
Yeah, I am a bit worried because I wrote it, as I said, I finished it 18 months ago. I wasn't in any way part of the university, and obviously in the book there is a fictional university college with a fictional provost who is pretty hideous, and then I found myself now going into Exeter College and meeting he's called the rector, but it's like the provost, and being slightly worried that he's going to find out about this book and haul me in front of him and say, is this meant to be me? It's not meant to be him at all. It's not meant to be anyone in Exeter College, and it's not meant to be an indictment of the university. It's not meant to say all Oxford colleges are like this college. It's just really is it. I think it's a plausible version of what a college might be. I'm not saying any college is like this. What I am saying about the university is it's as we were saying before, it's got these deep, strong connections with elitist institutions, government, media, business, and so on. And that's certainly true. It's a bastion of privilege in that sense.
When writing crime, how important do you think it is about highlighting important social issues? Because there's a lot of different issues like that in your book.
Yes,
got a lot of layers to it.
Well, yes, that there are. I think crime is a really good way for an author to engage with social issues, all sorts of issues, and there are lots of crime writers that do that really well. I remember reading Henning Mankell for the first time and feeling, it's really exciting, but he's saying something about I don't know, the nature of immigration in Sweden or gender relations of violence against women and really important subjects. So it is a really good way of doing that. I don't begin there as a storyteller myself, but I think those issues emerge. And when I felt maybe they were starting to emerge in my book, I was very keen to try and make them as interesting as possible. So I guess, in a way, the big one is about the inequalities, social inequalities in Oxford, between, as I was saying, wealth and poverty, but maybe more importantly between influence and a significant social position and people who don't have those sorts of networks around them. And I do see that in Oxford, that where we live, you go half a mile up the road, your Christchurch College with the cathedral. I mean, it's very visible. It's a massive chunk of architectural privilege. And you go half a mile down the road the other way, there's a trailer park under the ring road, which is going all day and all night. So there are these contrasts in Oxford, and obviously not just in Oxford. And I think that's an issue which it goes without saying needs to be addressed. And then I think in the position of Ryan, he's what Americans would call poor white trash, probably. That would be the label stuck on him. And I think there's an issue with disadvantaged white boys in particular, also girls growing up, just as there are real problems with black and brown British people growing up. There's a lot of stigma attached to them, and they have a lot to put up with, and a lot of disadvantages to overcome if they're to succeed. So those sorts of issues, I think I was interested in the more I kept on writing.
I was just curious because you were saying that young adult meant that you couldn't cover certain themes. I just wondered if it meant, with it being adult, that you could cover different things, and did you cover different things under your young adult?
With me, the sort of story always comes first, and that's basically characters in exciting situations. But then I think themes always emerge, and they do that, or they did when I was writing for younger adults. So the 3 YA crime novels I wrote, which are called Running Girl, Kid Got Shot, and Hey Sherlock, they all feature this character called Garvey Smith. He's 16. He's the sort of boy that's very well represented in life, I think, but not particularly in literature. He's super bright and just super lazy, massively lazy. Doesn't want to do anything, get out of bed, nothing. Smoking a bit of dope, getting in trouble with the police, playing truant from school. This is... he's a character, but he's also an issue in a sense. As I say, there are lots of these kids around. He's also mixed race, which I mean, it isn't. I don't particularly explore that, but I guess that is an issue. The big racial issue in the book is that there is another character, in a way, his foil. He's this slacker genius at school who gets involved with a murder because it's his ex-girlfriend who's been murdered. But the police investigator is a detective inspector who's a Sikh, Raminder Singh. There are a lot of Sikhs, I think, in the police, and he is a stickler for the rules and very uptight. And Garvey is this anarchic sort of presence who doesn't do anything by the rules. And part of the novel's interest, I think, lies in the relationship between them. And as a Sikh, Raminder puts up with a lot of hostility from people he encounters, and also within the police force that I'd created. And thinking further back, actually, there was a standalone novel I wrote for sort of 8 to 12-year-olds called Moon Pie, which is about an 11-year-old girl looking after her alcoholic father. And again, I was interested in the dramatic possibilities of that situation, but obviously there's an issue there about alcoholism in society, which was interesting to explore in that sort of middle grade book.
I noticed from the way you've just described it about how the experiences can be rather wide-ranging. What would you say that is missing from literature that because you said that you do read quite a lot, and a theme that you think is not been covered yet that needs covering?
That's a really hard question. I'm not sure, because I don't read, as I say, a huge amount of crime fiction. But in this particular book, I suppose, I think the idea of the difficulties around young white British boys in particular is an issue which isn't looked at so much as the difficulties which there are around, as I say, black and brown boys and girls growing up in Britain. So my wife's a teacher, right? And the the major problem, I think, in schools at the moment tends to be with lack of educational accomplishment by precisely young white boys, and something is not right, and I suspect it's an issue which isn't as addressed as it needs to be. So I'd like to see that addressed, in society and by politicians, but maybe also in literature. That would be interesting, I think.
Yeah, because I always find that once it's been addressed in literature, then it's often addressed later with politics, and yeah, people talking.
Yeah, no, that's right. It would give it a higher profile, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And I think then it's then that politicians start to sit up and notice.
What do you find you did talking about during the, because you said that there's a downtime period between when you finish the book and the next one. So what do you find yourself talking about to keep yourself from, because it must be a different kind of stage, as you say, writing goes in stages.
You mean just leisure, general stuff that I do?
Leisure and just generally, yeah.
So I do things to keep fit. I cycle up this terrible hill. There aren't many hills in Oxford, but there's one near me, so I go up it and bust my lungs and walk. My wife and I walk a lot round Oxford. It's a bit flat. I come from Sheffield. I miss the hills. I'd love. We like to go walking in hills if we can. But anyway, we do that. We're not like professional grade walkers, but we'll walk around a lot and we go on walking holidays, things like that. Like the theatre, like the cinema, we've all missed out on that. With lockdown, so I miss that. And friends, socializing, and reading. As we were saying before, I do a lot of that. I listen to music like lots of people. I'm not very knowledgeable about music. It's like a sort of a massive gap of knowledge in that I've got. But I listen to a bit of classical music. I listen to what you might call, I don't know, rock, pop, something like that. I've gone back to the Beatles. So I've been listening to the Beatles over and over. I put them in a little unique category on their own. So I've been enjoying doing that. Yeah, but that's the stuff.
That sounds pretty cool. It's quite ironic that you mentioned the films, because when I was discussing it with my sister earlier, I was saying that it reminded me a bit of like Lethal Weapon, because you've got like I would say that the two characters are like the two Lethal Weapon characters, and you've got like the serious one and the not so, yeah.
Okay, well, I don't know Lethal Weapon, I'm afraid. Although I do like going to the cinema. I'm not a massive film buff, but I will say that somewhere in the back of my mind was probably Pulp Fiction a little bit. Those two criminals who bicker all the time as they're going about their work. I mean, a very different sort of character and setup, obviously, but I did have from the beginning that Ryan and Ray partnership was going to be about two very different people not getting on and bickering, even though they had to work together.
Yeah, I just wondered, because you got like kickboxing, and I just thought kickboxing is quite an unusual thing to have for one of your attributes for the police. I've not seen that happen a lot.
Well, yeah, I don't kickbox myself, but funnily enough, the kickboxing comes directly from the grandson of a friend of ours who lives in Wales, and he was big into kickboxing, and it's the sort of thing where it goes under the radar a bit. It's not like sort of a glamorous thing, but there are lots of, I think, clubs and stuff in the various regions, and all sorts of competitions that happen, that go on. And if you're really good, it's possible to become, like competing at a national level. And this guy had, he was sort of 10, 11, 12, and he was kicking people's heads like no one's business, and being very good at it. So I thought it's the sort of thing a kid could grow up doing probably and get really good at.
No, I just found it quite interesting, especially when they're in awkward positions, and I just thought, yeah.
I like the idea as well of Ryan having done it a lot and maybe at quite a high national level when he was young, and then not done it, and been doing too many drugs and drinking and stuff, and then having to do it in a police context. He'd probably do himself a mischief, wouldn't he? I'd twang his groin or something.
Yeah, talking about mischief and things. I mean, he gets a lot in trouble with misconduct and stuff. And although we've all done the AC-12 and might have seen it in Line of Duty and stuff, what was the research like for that? Because that must have been a bit different. Because I've not seen it in much written books before. I mean,
research. I think Mick Herron says somewhere, I'm a firm adherent of the making it up school, and I guess I am as well. But I do feel I've got with research. I feel I've got to do enough so that it's not implausible, but not do too much that it limits me in trying to tell the story that I want to tell. So with the disciplinary stuff, I did basic research about police misconduct, just going on the internet basically, and you can read quite a lot of I mean the ones in Oxford anyway were open for anyone to read accounts of misconduct hearings and the verdicts that were handed down, and the sort of misconduct that was being done by police officers. So I went through enough of those to get a sense of what might go on. And I felt it would be an important part of the book because Ryan is exactly the sort of person who's going to get into trouble, always has done at school, and would as a policeman. And I don't want to give away too much about the book, but that's a constant theme in the book, and it's not going very well for Ryan, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I just found it quite interesting because, as I say, I've seen it on TV quite a bit, but not in books before.
Right, and I've got to say, I saw Line of Duty. I'm a big fan of Line of Duty, and for me, the most dramatic moments in the show are the interrogation scenes that go on in that like glass office in the middle of the room. They are so tense, and they're so formal in a way, and he focuses on the detail of how they might work, and it all adds to the drama. I thought they were fantastic. So I suppose that was in the back of my mind maybe when I was doing it.
I just wondered about the different tension points when you do your own interviews, because you've got like Ryan's a broad style, and then you got Ray's kind of different way of doing it. What was your approach when doing interviews with the characters?
Yeah, no, I enjoyed doing that, and some of the interviews are done sort of just in direct dialogue, and some of them are described, so you get a sense of what might be going on. But I wanted there to be a definite dramatic and to some degree comic contrast between Ryan's approach, where he's got no sort of control button really, so he just wades in and loses his blob, and Ray, who is trying to be sophisticated and to the point and also considerate in various ways. Ryan wants a result, and he's not that bothered about how he gets it. So I did enjoy doing the interview scenes, and in the next book there are several of those as well.
Yeah, I was curious as to I wasn't going to I was curious as to how you were going to tackle that. Yeah, I wasn't good. Yeah.
Well, the next, again, neither of us want to give away very much, but the next book then does follow on immediately after a killing in November, where their situations, to begin with anyway, are very different, Ryan and Ray, but they end up being interested in and trying to understand a murder that's happened in Oxford, and going about it to some degree separately and to some degree together.
Oh, I can see where that might happen. Yeah, I'm not going to say how, obviously, but yeah, yeah. As we've got like 15 minutes, I can see a number of comments. I don't know whether there's any questions in there, but maybe can you see?
There's a question about your covers for each genre perfectly set the mood. Do you have a favorite? So is that a question about my books?
Yeah,
My different books. Well, I'm really glad, Samantha, that you think they do set the mood. I've been very lucky with covers, and I've worked with different publishers, so they're different publishers operating in different ways. And with the YA books, I can show you the covers. Actually, hang on. So these are the covers of the YA books: Running Girl, Kid Got Shot, Hey Sherlock. So we've got a sort of upside down. Sorry, we've got a sort of labyrinth theme going on. It was a designer called Alice Todd, and she was really, really good, and had this idea of the labyrinth, the mystery, how to get from one place to another with sort of clues as motifs, like a running shoe and a car and a missing button, which are all clues in the plot, smuggled in among the labyrinth. And I mean, with covers, there's such inflammatory things for a publisher and an author to talk about, because everyone has a view on the cover, right? The sales department have a view, the editor has a view, the author has a view, everyone has a view, the author's mother has a view, and all that gets fed into a discussion. I mean, they're among the most loved and the most hated things that, when I was in publishing, they were talked about, and they're really important as well, because they're meant to do a job of that instant connection between the book in the bookshop and the browser who catches sight of it, and you've got to be interested in it, you've got to think it's striking, you've got to notice it, and you've got to think it's right for the book as well. So it has to do a lot of jobs. Yeah.
So what was your main role in publishing? Because I read something like that on the internet about you, and I did some research about it. But I'm always curious about when someone says they're the role in publishing, how that might have influenced yourself as a writer. Because obviously you're now on the other side of it, aren't you?
Yeah, no, I know. I'm a strange double-headed beast in a way. I mean, I've had parallel careers. So all my life since graduating in 1984, that I've been a publisher and a writer. And at first, the writing was done in my spare time, and I was just a full-time publisher. And I worked for Oxford University Press for a long time, and then various other publishers, Thames and Hudson, the art publisher, some American publishers. And then I started writing children's books. And so I had a children's books publisher of my books, Random House, in particular an imprint called David Fickling Books. And then David Fickling asked me to join his team as a children's book publisher. So then I became a children's book publisher. And David also asked me to help him go independent. So with David, we set up David Fickling Books as an independent children's publisher. And then I was the MD of that until the end of 2018. And that was slightly odd because they were publishing my children's books as well as me being MD of the company. So in a sense, I would deliver books to myself, which is a bit weird. Anyway, and then I'd pass them on to other people, but it was still a bit odd.
So what was it like being on the other side of it? And how did you choose was it complicated to be the publisher as well?
Well, I liked being both. I've got to admit, it was only awkward really in relation to my own books, but everything else was great. And the children's book world is just such a fantastic world to be in, and as a country, we are just really good at it. You know, we are really good at producing J.K. Rowling and Philip Pullman and writers who publish stories that go all around the world. And I was lucky enough to work with Philip Pullman on a book of essays that he did, where I was the editor working with him. But other great authors as well, at DFB, Jenny Downham, for instance, who's a wonderful YA author. So just many great authors to work with, and I love working with authors. So, well, I was MD, so I was behind a spreadsheet a lot of the time. But when I'd get involved with an author editorially, which I did a bit from time to time, that's my background, an editor. Then it's wonderful working on an author's story and seeing how they approach it and what they do and how it might work. It's fantastic.
Has that helped you with your current job, with helping students with their essays? Because that sounds quite similar as the role.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's exactly right. Being an editor and working with an author on their book is has a lot of similarities with being a teacher working with a student on their essay. Some of the same issues arise to do with writing, and it's also about talking to authors. I mean, authors need someone to tell them very clearly and directly and honestly what isn't going so well in their writing, so that these are issues that they can take on themselves and decide whether or not they want to address them and how they want to address them. But at the same time, all authors need hope. They need to be told they are capable of doing it, even if the bit of writing they've done isn't quite working yet. And so it's a wonderful education, I think, in trying to work out how to relate to another person on that level, to be able to be direct and honest, but at the same time, be supportive in thinking that they can absolutely do what you think they can. So it was really great being an editor, I think. Yeah.
Is there anything we've not covered that you want to kind of talk about?
Well, there's someone has asked, do you plan on writing a series? So I should answer that and say, yes, that's the idea. I think a series is a really interesting idea for both the publisher and the author. It's one of those instances where I think they can agree on a common plan, because a publisher is very often nervous. They don't want to commit to too much before they know it's going to be a success. And a series is a good way of doing that. It's not like, say, a trilogy where a publisher will buy 3 books all at once. And if the first book doesn't do very well, they're stuck with 2 books that probably won't do very well. A series, it's a chance for an author and a publisher to say, we'll publish 1 or 2 and then see how it goes. So this one's come out. There's another one which will be called The Broken Afternoon with Ray and Ryan, coming out next January, so a year from now. And then I'm just organising with the publisher to do another 2. So there'll be then 4, and then there'll be a rain check to see if it's working or not.
Well, I've really enjoyed this art, because it's like kind of such a different book, and I would say to people that haven't read it yet, you'll definitely enjoy all the characters. But what was your favourite character of the book?
Well, the gate crashing character, Ryan Jr., I've got a massive soft spot for, and I guess that comes out in the book. But I once saw, oh God, what's her name? Elizabeth Strout, I think. Who is that? Her name? I think, an American novelist. She was asked that question. She said, "I love all my characters, even the really horrid ones, even the disgusting and nasty ones. I love them all." And there is something about that, I think, in creating these characters. So, as fictional characters, I like all of them. I think if I met Ryan in the flesh, I would be challenged, you know, because he's as I say, his manners are not fantastic, and he's also got a habit of giving people home truths they might not want to hear. So that would probably be pretty unnerving. But
Yeah,
but as a fictional character, I'm interested in Ryan. I think that's the most important thing for an author. They have to be interested in their own characters, and I am really interested in Ryan.
as a final question, as you just talked about writing horrible characters, what would your tip be for writing some evil characters? Because even because you've got quite a few characters that you would want possibly to.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think they have to be really evil. I think they have to do the job. You know, I think their role is to hit the reader with their nastiness, and that needs to land. But how you do that, I often think with characters, don't make them, if you can, stereotypical. I try to avoid that. I don't know whether I succeed, but if you've got an evil character, they shouldn't be 100% evil. They should be relatable in some way, a bit as well. In other words, make them a bit more complex, humanize them, because that's more frightening than a two-dimensional character of evil tendencies.
I would say that you're aware of the stereotypes, but you played with them well.
That is very kind. Excellent. I should write that down. I can put it on the cover. Yeah. Well, that's a big compliment because I think that is an occupational hazard for a writer. To create characters, you have to try to avoid the stereotype if you can.
Thank you so much for such a really interesting hour, and I hope that the next 3 books go just as well as this one.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I've really enjoyed it, and thank you for all your questions, which have really landed and made me think more about the book. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you.
I've really enjoyed it, and I'll see everybody else next week at 7.